May the words of my mouth and may the meditations of all of our hearts be acceptable in your sight. O Lord, you are our strength. You are our Redeemer. Amen. Before I begin, I want to share, I don't know, it's a funny little story to me. As I was driving in this morning, I got a call from Celinda, and she said, I wanted to let you know that Elliot wanted to come to church with you this morning. I had decided to let him sleep in because Lillian has to go to a soccer tournament, so everybody else was going to go, and I just figured, well, Elliot would want to do that too. And she called and said, no, he really wanted to come to church so he could spend time with his friends. So, I thought you all might want to hear that message because it's important that this 7-year-old really likes to be here and is missing not being here today. I had another interesting encounter this week by a guy who stopped in a couple of times asking to see the pastor. And it turns out he has been worshiping in a couple of the churches further north on Noble, on the other side of Monticello. And his name is Daniel Parker. And Daniel told me that God had laid upon his heart a mission to build a Christian internet cafe in one of the storefronts across from Noble School. Now, when he first introduced the idea to me, he gave as his inspiration what he's, this is kind of a quote, what he's seeing happening in the area. His vision is to provide a cafe with a Christian environment where Christians can feel at home and where parents can feel safe to have their children use the internet. They're not watched at the library, he claims. And he said it would be good for the churches in the area to band together in this project in order to present a Christian witness. At the beginning of the conversation, I was interested because I've long thought that it made sense for this block to have a cafe, a place where people could come and sit and hang out. It makes perfect sense to me having a library across the street that people could go check out books and go to the cafe and read and enjoy coffee, tea, or whatever they would like. Now, I also have to say I've long had this fantasy, this idea that somehow our congregation could promote a cafe and serve fair trade coffees and teas, and they have homemade or at least locally made bakery items and things like that, and then have a connection to the sanctuary where people could just come and sit and be quiet and have a place just to be. That's been my fantasy, but I know I got to put that off someplace else. So I have to say that I really wanted to listen to Daniel's idea because I thought it would be great for us to have a cafe in this neighborhood. Now, I will say that Daniel's language is much more evangelical than I am comfortable with. But I'm learning that I need to listen before I start stereotyping. He mentioned again one of the main reasons for this cafe was to present a Christian witness in the area because of what he was seeing. At first I was thinking, okay, well, he's seeing a lot of houses up for sale, or he's seeing a lot of rented homes, and maybe he feels that some of the folks in the neighborhood might need a little uplifting Christian presence in the area. Maybe that's what he's seeing. But then it started to dawn on me what he might be meaning about what he's seeing going on in the neighborhood. But I wanted to give him the chance to tell me before I made some leaps. So I asked him. And he told me it had to do with all the Middle Eastern people that have moved into the neighborhood. Now, I quickly realized that I know Nina has gone to take Mary down to the nursery, but I'm realizing he's talking about the folks from Bhutan and Nepal who are starting to move into the neighborhood. So instead of doing some sort of quick geography lesson and say how way far he was about who these people are who have moved into the neighborhood, I wanted to say straight out that we know some of these people, that we garden with some of these folks, that many of the folks use the building for English classes, and that some of the folks worship with us. And I also want to let them know then that the vast majority of the folks have as their religious background Hindu, that they're very peace-loving people and certainly not a threat to the neighborhood. It was at this point that it seemed to me a good deal of Daniel's evangelical rhetoric softened a bit. Daniel shared with me that his vision wasn't to convert people, and that he respected people of differing religious backgrounds. No, he really just felt it was upon his heart to bring people of different Christian backgrounds together to do this endeavor, the cafe. And so, he invited me to a planning meeting, which is this coming Saturday. So we'll see how the story goes after that. Now, I found it interesting timing that this same week that I had this encounter with Daniel, we're presented with the story about Paul in Athens. Daniel's ardor for the gospel is very much like the Apostle Paul's ardor for the gospel. And I can respect that. However, I have more appreciation for the way that Luke tells us Paul went about his mission in Athens, and I want to talk through that just a little bit. The first thing that we hear about Paul while he's waiting for Silas and Timothy to come and meet him in Greece, or at least in Athens, is that Paul walks around. He gets to know what's all around Athens. He walks, and he sees, and he observes, and he does form some conclusions, but he takes the time to get to know what he's seeing before he starts speaking about what he's seeing. He also takes the time to talk with people. He goes to the local synagogue and talks to the Jewish folks who are there, and they have some fairly heated discussions about why Paul is there and what his mission is. He goes to some of the more, not religious places, but just any place where people will go and talk. He has conversations and debates with people. He shares about how he's distressed about the prevalence of idol worship around there, and he starts to form what his sermon, what his message is going to be about. And then the meat of our text today is that Paul arrives at this place called the Areopagus. That might be one way to pronounce the Greek. There are probably other ways to pronounce the Greek. But he arrives at this place called the Areopagus, which is this, I've looked at pictures now online, it's this huge rock formation, marble, it's really a marble outcropping. If you look at the pictures, you can see like 30 people scattered across the top of it. It's that big, and it's just down the hill from the Acropolis. And in fact, there's some beautiful views looking at the Parthenon from the Areopagus. So that's the name of this rock formation. It's also the name of a council that used to be there about 500, 400 BC. They would meet there to discuss items that would come up. They were like a court. And anything that needed to be debated there, they would meet on that rock and people would come and talk there. So it was to this place and to this people, the Areopagus, that Paul came and wanted to share his reflections about what he was seeing going on in Athens. Another name for the Areopagus is also Mars Hill. That was the Roman name. So Ares was the god for the Greeks, Mars was the god for the Romans, and so it was either Areopagus, meaning big rock of Ares, or Mars Hill, big rock for Mars. So those are a couple of the little interesting tidbits about the Areopagus. So as Paul starts to go into his sermon, what he does is he just declares what he has seen in the city, and he declares what his faith tradition has taught him and what he believes. And he uses some of those talking points from what he has seen in the city. As he was walking around, he saw an altar with the inscription on it, "To an unknown God." Paul's not quite sure who that unknown God is. Well, I guess no one will be, because it's an unknown God. But he takes the leap to then say, this God is the God that I worship. This God is the God that I know. And Paul continues to talk about who this God is, the one that made heaven and earth, the one that has given breath to everything, the one who has given life. And this God also is there to be in relationship with us. God even wants us to grope and to find God, Paul says. And then he uses a couple of quotes from some of the local poets. He says, this God that I'm talking about is the one that your poet has even written about. In him we live and move and have our being. And one of the other poets, for we too are his offspring. And Paul continued then to not only talk about how we live and move and have our being through God, but God came and had a relationship with us and even calls for us to repent and to turn towards God. I found out that Paul had this sermon from the rock, and at some point during time, people have crafted a plaque written in Greek of this whole entire sermon, and it's now affixed to the foot of the Areopagus, so that anyone can come, if you know Greek at least, maybe it's been translated, but can read that and be reminded of what Paul was speaking about there. What we learn through Luke's account is that people listened because people liked to hear things that were new. That's another part of Luke's message, is that people like to be in debate. They like to be in conversation. They like to share their thoughts and hear other people's thoughts, and were willing to listen to what people had to say. And as you can imagine, as some people listened to Paul, some people laughed at him, called him a babbler. Some people listened. Some people joined the movement that Paul was leading. One of the members, it tells us, of the Areopagus, Dionysius, which is why he's an Areopagite, because he's a member of the Areopagus, decided to join this movement. And also a woman named Damaris joined. I like to look at the Greek because the Greek often will give clues to why these people joined. The word Damaris in Greek means heifer. I'm not quite sure what that has to do with anything except that maybe that was her name. So no theological significance that I can understand about Damaris joining this group, except for the fact that she's a woman. And it's important for Luke to lift up not only the men who join the Christian movement, but also